Why is it? Why is it so? Why is it that we just find it so difficult to just be calm now and just accept whatever the future brings?
Well, look, I think the thing is, I don't think people are excited about the future. They're excited about controlling the future. Everything you just mentioned, going to a psychic, throwing bones, it's about the need to control it, have an absolute outcome, almost an addiction to certainty. And so I think that's what people are trying to do when they're speaking about the future. They're trying to figure out how they need to prepare, what they need to do, and what it's going to look like.
Hey there, before we get started, I want to share something really important with you. I started The Few with one thing in mind, and that was to help you close the gap between what you want and where you are today to live the life you've always dreamed of. We've scoured the world to find the best guests to inspire you on that journey. Who better to learn how to be one of the few than those that already are? Individuals that do live life on their terms and have achieved their life dream. Subscribe to The Few with Boo now. Join our community. If you find these episodes valuable, the more subscribers we have, the more listeners we get, the greater the guests we bring on the show. To subscribe now, hit the button, and let's dive into this episode of The Few. We have the perfect guest to be talking about all things future and all things humanity. John, g'day, John Sanei. Welcome to the show. I tell you what, John, I'm super excited, and you're a sharp-looking man. I've got to say, look at that. Thanks for coming on the show, mate.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward to the chat.
So, John, the future. There's always been a propensity for human beings to be excited by the future, whether it's fortune tellers, whether it's reading the bones or the tea leaves. There is just something fascinating about the future. What is it about the future that gets humans so excited it becomes such a source of conversation, even though it doesn't even exist yet?
Well, look, I think the thing is, I don't think people are excited about the future. They're excited about controlling the future. Everything you just mentioned, going to a psychic, throwing bones, it's about the need to control it, have an absolute outcome, almost an addiction to certainty. And so I think that's what people are trying to do when they're speaking about the future. They're trying to figure out how they need to prepare, what they need to do, and what it's going to look like. But unfortunately, in today's world, and we'll talk through it in today's interview, there are just far too many domino effects that are taking shape. We have everything from education to religion to patriarchy to the economic situation, the political system, the convergence of technologies, and new alien intelligence as AI arriving. It just seems far too uncertain for us to have any level of certainty. And I think that what most people have always done for the last hundreds of years is look at certain tools that give them that solace about the future. But all those tools don't seem to be working anymore. And we need new tools to understand how to prepare for this unbelievably different future.
It's like we've tripped offline. It's like the pinball machine. We've reached tilt all of a sudden, almost like we're consumed with so much information. I was reading the other day a little bit about our ability to process information, and our perceptions are predominantly negative before we even consume information. 80 to 90% of our sentiment is negative. And then when we consume the information, we unfortunately tend to go and find information that just reinforces that negative sentiment. However, when we look at the future and it's a holiday or a promotion or in your TED talk, you talk about more in the future. We just don't seem to be able to get comfortable with that yin and yang between a future that is hopeful and a future that's, I guess, kind of desolate. Why is it? Why is it so? Why is it that we just find it so difficult to just be calm now and just accept whatever the future brings?
So it's a great question. And we can see that we are struggling because the pharmaceutical industry has tripled in value over the last 12 years. People are medicating away their anxiousness, their sort of this fear of the unknown. And through my research, I've started to realize that actually what has happened to us is we have had anxiousness and fear baked into the system. Let me explain. For 10,000 years in the agricultural era, we had simple rules. The rules were follow your forefathers, follow the seasons, and work the fields for 12 to 16 hours a day, and you'd be successful. And for 500 generations, for 10,000 years, there was no stress. There was no analytical thinking. There was no knowledge uptake. It was just a very simple set of rules. And then we arrive in the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution says to us, look, all the rules that you followed in the agricultural era have become irrelevant because we have sort of created our own new source of power, like steam engine and combustion engine, all those things. So the rules went from follow your forefathers to follow the system. It went from understanding the seasons to becoming analytical and logical in your thinking. And it went from working the fields to develop your IQ. Now, everything inside the Industrial Revolution has got something in it that's about a deadline, because the focus of the Industrial Revolution is efficiencies and profitability at all costs. And so from school, the system where we had to pass exams, had to pass tests, and if we didn't, we would have to stay back a whole year. And so we used to cram ourselves into the system, not our own delight, our own fascination, our own excitement. None of that was important. It was how much you could fit into the system. Now you take your brain that is fully creative and fully open and fully lateral, and then you squeeze it into a system. And now you say to the system, look, you have a deadline every week. You have an exam coming up. You have tests coming up. You have all this pressure on you. So what happens is that from a very young age, what we do is we prepare for danger. And this danger has become baked into our system and our perspective as we start to deal with the world around us. But the truth is that the whole idea of this danger is only based on one thing, on our brainwaves. And the brainwave that we have engaged with as a global human society is a brainwave called a high beta brainwave. And a high beta brainwave says, highly focused, I'm addicted to certainty, my eye is on the ball, on the end result, and I'm going to fuel myself with adrenaline so that I can lift my energy and get to the end result. It's impossible to be looking forward to an uncertain future with excitement if you're coming from a high beta brainwave. Impossible. Because a high beta brainwave tells you your body that anything that is not in your control is fearful. And so what do? We go into deep OCD or planning and trying to control everything. But here we are in a world where everything is out of control. There is absolute chaos. We are moving from the industrial era to the quantum era. The rules are in flux. It's no more about following a system. The system itself is crumbling. So now it's about following your uniqueness. Now it's about...
I don't think people understand that, though.
Well, they do and they don't, because it's their comfort zone, right?
Yeah, I think they understand it in terms of conceptually, but I think the fact that it's not something that's landed at a spiritual level is this constant overwhelm and exhaustion and fatigue. But people sort of talk around it, that it's not there. But I certainly perceive, I'm interested to get your opinion, that the world generally, as you walk around, as you feel the service at a restaurant, as you talk to somebody at a retail, people are even too exhausted for dinner parties. Like there's just this, I just am so exhausted, which it sounds like is this whole leaning into beta waves, just trying to solve the unsolvable problem.
So I think the thing is that people are waking up fatigued and exhausted. And this shows us that we have a system that's keeping us on a treadmill, and the future requires us to be individual and lateral, not a treadmill. So for 200 years, the high beta brainwaves actually worked really well because it fitted into the system of the economies of scale. But because the crumbling is only just beginning, and remember that a transformation of any sort always has three phases to it. It has the sad, the strange, and the adventure. We're in the sad and the strange. We've just left the shore of familiarity over the last few years. We've just left our comfort zones. We've been pushed out of the identities that we've been building for the last 40, 50 years. And now we have to start this journey towards the strange new world where we are not who we are supposed to be. The world is not quite what it needs to be. And so we are all in a state of flux. Now, the best thing we could be doing, and maybe the only thing we should be doing, is not focusing on psychological leveling. And I tell you why, is because I think psychology for the last 100 years, since Carl Jung and Freud came into the picture, really helped us in an immense way in a stable world. I ask my audiences around the world, who here has read Brené Brown? Who here has read Atomic Habits? Who here has read Simon Sinek? Who here has watched all the TED Talks? We've done all of those things, but people are still anxious. People are still fearful, which means that reading and engaging with software, which I call psychology, isn't good enough and quick enough. So what we need to be doing is neuroscience, hardware changes. And again, the brainwave of beta is accessing only a very small slither of your brain. And so what we have to do is move ourselves into an alpha brainwave. And in an alpha brainwave, we wide awake, we focused, we lateral in our thinking, but we're relaxed. And this is the key, is that our hearts are not in a panic and our brains have got clarity. In a state of absolute flux and uncertainty, your superpower is staying calm. So how do you go about changing your brainwaves? There's only two ways that we're seeing around the world that we can start to see our changing our brainwaves. One is meditation, because meditation helps us rewire and refire. Two, the use of psilocybin magic mushrooms. Both of these, under a brain scan, do exactly the same thing to your brain. They help you rewire your brain, giving you a new personality.
Which is your preferred methodology, mate?
Both at the same time. And so when you start to... Depends which country I'm in when you're asking me that question. So it all depends on how we can rewire our brain as quickly as possible, increase our elevation and our consciousness to see something new in the future. And I'll leave you with two quotes here. The first quote is from Einstein. He says, you cannot solve a problem from the same awareness that created it. And so what we have is a level of awareness, and our awareness is a high beta brainwave awareness. Our awareness is an industrial revolution awareness. We can't see the wood for the trees from this level of awareness. When we increase our awareness, new possibilities show up that are not available to us in this level of awareness. Two, Alvin Toffler, he says, the illiterate of the 21st century are not the ones who cannot read and cannot write, but the ones who cannot unlearn to relearn. And so this idea of unlearning to change your awareness becomes the only thing as human beings that we must focus on with imperative speed as AI becomes more and more ubiquitously surrounding us and starting to change the world around us.
Is it not the fact that whilst we need to build that awareness of our alpha waves and create the space to do that, that something, and I'm just holding my smartphone up to the camera right now, is actually conditioning and training those beta waves again. That this device, I was reading a research paper the other day, a young kid had a brain injury, so he was regularly having fMRI scans, and pre and post COVID, his cerebellum had shrunk about 36%, and his primal, his amygdala and his primal structures had grown, and his screen time had grown phenomenally. Now it's not a it's a theory. There's no direct link here, but there is I believe, a passivity that we are now experiencing as humanity. We are being pacified by information, not knowledge. And this passivity and conditioning is actually pulling us further and further away from that awareness and creating less space for us to step back. So how and this is, it's easy to say, hey, get off your phone and meditate, right? That's easy to say. But the conditioning we now have makes that even harder. I mean, have you got any theories around the way the digital world engages our neural structures versus the old-fashioned way? As you said, a hard day in the fields, we'd go and crack some yams, have a few beers, and reflect and have some quiet time and sleep because we're exhausted because we're physical. Like it's a pretty massive change in humanity and the way we use all the cells in our body, right? Sorry, long-winded and quite broad question there, but
no, not at all. No, you spot on. But I think it's not. I think the digitization is just an extension of the factory line, the schooling system, the organizational structures, and even, dare I say, the religious structures that were all based on trying to keep a level of control so that people were dumbed down and following a system. When you are able to apply yourself to the system with an elevated consciousness, the system itself changes. The system itself is perceived differently. You engage with the tools in a very, very different way. And this goes back down to the idea that a surgeon's knife can kill you or save your life. It depends how you want to use it. Now, of course, technology and digitization has sort of coaxed us and created an illusion of a world out there that isn't really real. I mean, think about all the QAnon stuff and all the right-wing stuff that's been birthed out of social media. So, of course, it's got its absolute negative side of it, but also the proliferation of access to new things, new experiences, and new tribes around the world are also available to us. So what I always suggest to my audiences around the world is, look, everything is neutral. It depends on your level of awareness. It depends on your level of consciousness, and it depends on your courage. And let's just break down courage for a second, because we can get swooped up into anything. You know, have you ever any friends that got swooped up into a drug circle and never got out? Yes, that's a swooping up into an energy form. And so is digitization, another thing that we can be swooped up in. But courage has got many, many layers to it. And the first type of courage we must think about is, do we have the courage to be intelligent in the way we think and grasp new thoughts? Now, if we don't have the courage to think new thoughts, then we're stuck, and the social media will suck us into whatever it tells us that we need to be sucked into. Do we have the courage to be spiritually looking for our purpose, our curiosity, and our excitement out there? Most people are stuck into following a system and then complaining about the system itself, lacking courage in many ways.
I don't think they even know they need courage, though, because it comes down to you mentioned before. I'm not sure whether people even realize that in a they don't even have the awareness that courage is required. Their awareness is of their situation. You said it very succinctly again in your TED talk around when slavery was a cultural norm. It was normal for slaves. Before suffrage and women couldn't vote, women not voting was just the norm, and everyone just kind of accepted it. I've certainly found, in the last 17 years traveling around the world and also having a humanitarian projects business, living in Afghanistan, Dubai, and that part of the world, was just how happy someone in Afghanistan could be with a meal. However, the same satisfaction and joy back here in Australia would be the color of the seats on your BMW were bespoke. This normalization. And I want to explore that with you for a minute, because when you talk about someone's awareness or lack of, my experience is people aren't aware and they don't know to be aware. How do you create that? And I certainly know in myself sometimes I'm not aware. I am so absorbed in something that and not wasting time or doing something that's not particularly good for myself. And I'm like, where's my awareness gone? How do you know to be aware? Like, what is it? What is there a mantra? Is there a practice? What do we do to help people with realize you need awareness without disappearing down their channel on Facebook and just being fed the same toxic information that they've become attached to?
Look, again, another great question. And let me just start off with saying that I'm always interested in the most cutting edge of human society, like the Formula One, right? The Formula One is on the cutting edge of motoring, and then it trickles that down into the mass market. The mass market itself, I don't know. I'm not a specialist in the mass market. I on the cutting edge of society, where people have many luxuries and have got the time and energy to want to self-actualize, these questions become obvious. But we have to also think about is that by the time we're 35 years old, science has proven that we're having between 60 and 70,000 thoughts a day, of which 90% are the same thoughts. So we have a neuroplasticity issue that is keeping us stuck and programmed into a level of software based on the hardware that's not able to readjust and become malleable. Think about putting an iOS 16 software into an iPhone 1. It just wouldn't have the capacity to hold it. So you're asking me is like, how do we get the masses to wake up? I really have no idea. I think the best thing we could do is wake ourselves up. And in that ripple effect of waking ourselves up and then allowing that ripple to take care of how it needs to take care of things. So, for example, what I do is I'm like a Trojan horse of consciousness that goes into speaking to governments and organizations, trying to get them to prepare for tomorrow. But all I'm actually doing, without them really realizing, is getting them to realize that if they don't elevate their consciousness, and if they don't start thinking about thinking and reevaluating how they're adding value to the world, they're going to become irrelevant. But I don't come under the guise of a lentil-eating, sandal-wearing, Jesus-looking guy. I'm coming in speaking the futurist terminology But just realize that if you don't have that level of consciousness, you're trapped in an old way of thinking. So I think the best thing we could do is to try and firstly live the example of it, because there's a great saying that says, your actions are so loud, I can't hear a word you're saying. And so the first thing is act it. The second thing, try and explain it and sort of like ritualize the communication from that space of awareness. And then allow those souls that want to be awoken to wake up, and the ones who don't, allow them to carry on living the lives that they need to too.
I think a lot of people don't want to be awakened. I think being awake is I guess woke is an iteration of awake. And so go back, you said before about going in and leaders and helping leaders gain awareness. And I do a similar thing. It's called situational awareness, which is just the ability to be on self-aware into awareness of the situation and your effect on other people and their effect on you, and the fact that we can influence that, right? So when you go into a leadership group, even the best leadership group on the planet, in that group you maybe have 20%. I mean, you can't put numbers on it, but a smaller minority than a larger minority who have awareness, right? Like some people just have it and some people don't. I think you can deliberately get it, but I think people who deliberately get it are people that undergo some sort of treatment for their OCD or treatment for their depression. They understand cognitive behavioral therapy, and they start to go through methodologies of comprehending what's going on with the feelings, thoughts, and actions start to get connected. If you're in an environment where you're in a team of leaders or a team, and there's two people that are aware and they're leading 20 other people, how do they, and you're talking actions, how do they start a process to inspire awareness?
The first thing I think we could do, and maybe the only thing we could do, is help the team access an alpha brainwave. When you are able to access that alpha brainwave, everything else looks after itself. Courage is obvious. Creativity is obvious. Collaboration is obvious. All those things become an obvious extension of who you are. But in a high beta brainwave, all of those are against what your body tells you is available. So an organization will tell its people, I want you to think out the box, which is the worst corporate line in the history of corporate lines, because how can you ask people that have been hired to bring stability to an existing system to think out of the system, away from their education, away from their legacy, to create a solution that might actually disrupt their own jobs? An impossibility. And what I always tell my clients is, why didn't Mercedes-Benz come up with Tesla? And why didn't NASA come up with SpaceX? And why didn't Google come up with OpenAI? And the reason is that everybody in those decision-making processes are addicted to a high beta brainwave, focused on a short outcome, focused on the quality profits, focused on modifications. The system itself doesn't allow you to step out. The system itself forces you to step back in. And so what I do is I start many of my strategy sessions with a 20-minute meditation. I give you the theory of what's going to happen to your brain, why it's necessary for it to happen to your brain. And then as we move into an alpha brainwave, you start to access different parts of your brain, different parts of your creativity, different parts of who you are. And now you can start to think laterally. And now you can start to see things in a very different way. Now, the example I always use is the person who goes on holiday. The version of you that goes on holiday is a high beta brainwave version of you. Irritated at the world, scared of the future, highly anxious, can't sleep, restless in many ways. 5 days into the holiday, what starts happening? You start accessing the alpha brainwave version of you. All of a sudden, you have all these new ideas. You have all these things that you're writing down, lists of things you should do, that when you get back to life, it's like you spend more time with your kids, eat better, exercise more. All of a sudden, you have all this energy to think laterally. And by the time you get back from holiday, your husband doesn't irritate you. The kids' noise is okay. That pothole that you drove over is all good. That Muppet at work doesn't irritate you. And at 3 hours back at work, you would say the exact term, I can't even remember I was on holiday. And what you're actually saying is, I clicked out of an alpha creative brainwave and moved into a beta brainwave, which is all about survival. And so we have to, as leaders in organizations, think about the brain that we are accessing of the people we're working with. So if your culture is so focused on outcomes and profitability only, then allow them to continue thinking on that track. Hire a different team to think creative. You can't get one team to do both. And I'm not saying everybody should be creative. Some people need to be there and stuck to deadlines because you need profitability to be coming in to pay for the tomorrow teams. But you also can't be asking the same people to be doing both. I think that is a big, big mistake because you're asking people to think differently, become AI specialists, data specialists, understand the future of consumerism, where everything they've been trained in has been legacy. And so now you're asking people with legacy to think about things in different ways, which is an impossibility.
So are we now a result of a overstimulation of the beta brain within our leadership that allows people without awareness just to follow a pathway that isn't leading to what you could perceive as anything great? I mean, you look at the world, right? We're always flooded with, climate change, politics, war. The flip side, there's a lot of good things happen as well. We are evolving very, very, very cleverly, but at the same time, it kind of feels like that is actually becoming a balance that's turning a little bit in terms of, let's say, for example, you're a Persian, you grew up in South Africa, you obviously grew up in an environment where there was a period of great hope, a period of awareness and actualization, and some would say that that is no longer the case. Right, that there's a regression and another, I guess, retreat back to within ourselves rather than the greater good. Another big question, and I'd rather ask the big questions than just talk about the low level stuff. And you probably don't have an answer for this, but what is going on that and the importance of the gravitas of one individual. So someone like Nelson Mandela, someone who has that actions over words. Is humanity designed to only have 4, 5, 6 leaders at any point in time? The Martin Luther Kings, the Gandhis, the Obamas, that have some degree of actualization and selflessness, Mother Teresa, that people latch onto, because obviously the masses love to latch onto that story, right? If they're given the opportunity. So at a macro scale, in terms of 8 billion humans, where do these people come from? Is it born? Is it bred? Your journey as a 5-year-old to where you are now, is it just a different, different 60,000 thoughts a day, naturally?
Again, great question. I think that everybody's on their own path, and everybody requires a different level of consciousness and a mission to reach. I would imagine that the people in the Tibetan mountains think that we are Neanderthals when it comes to our emotional awareness. And you have people that are in absolute survival in Afghanistan and Pakistan, in Karachi and those sort of places. So I think we have 8 billion movies playing on with 8 billion different tasks and missions that are happening. And I don't think we need to try and make everybody in the same system. So I don't think that's necessary. But I do think that if we just think about the South African context, we realize that there has been so much trauma in that country and so much oppression and so much killing since the 1600s that all of that emotional lineage pain has not been processed. And so, of course, we will have a country that will initially celebrate its freedom, but then go back into the process of playing out the unhealed trauma that the country's had. America is going through something very similar at the moment as well, in a different way. But unhealed sadness shows up as anger. And sadness and anger are linked to survival. And so if you think about what the country's doing, it's in survival mode based on a lack of an emotional healing of sadness and anger. And so we find ourselves in the wild, wild west because everybody's for themselves. Everybody is now in this hyper survival mode, all based on a lack of emotional intelligence. And what Nelson Mandela did was practice one thing and only one thing, the power to forgive. And he became a world icon for one thing, the ability to forgive. And what he did on Robben Island was obviously must have elevated his consciousness in a way, because in that new type of consciousness, there was nobody to be angry with. I'll give you a quote to land this a little bit for you. Einstein said many, many years ago, he said, the medicine of the future will be the medicine of frequency. Now, let's just understand what frequency is. Frequency is based on our electronic frequency, resonance. Our electronic resonance is based on the way we think, act, and feel. Our personality creates this resonance. And so now what happens is that we get so stuck in this 90% of a loop that we don't have the awareness to pop out of it, to change the thought processes so that we can have a different resonance, to have a new awareness. And that's what Madiba did. Mandela changed these resonance, changed these awareness. And obviously in the new state of awareness, there was nothing to hold a grudge against, understanding that that actually was a lower energy form. So I think as the world we have, and I think since the beginning of history, since we've been learning from it, there's always been an enlightened few to come and help us. All the way back from Jesus to Muhammad to keep going, Moses. We've always had these characters showing up. I think in today's world, what we're starting to see is a proliferation of these characters, all the way from influencers that are helping spiritual bubblegummers to sort of wake up and move in that sort of direction, all the way up to people that are doing incredible things, channeling alien beings and all sorts of weird and wonderful things on the right-hand side. So you have a range of all of these things happening. So I don't think that we're in massive trouble. I do think that there's layers and pockets of incredible consciousness that's growing around the world. And my mission, and what I say always is my mission is to bring optimism to the world. And if you can bring more optimism to the world, what you start to do is you elevate the consciousness. And together as a team in collaboration, we can start to work in better ways. So yes, there is a lot of strife. And yes, there's a lot of breakdown and a lot of implosion. But remember, you always need winter before spring. And we are in winter.
One of the things I heard once, which I thought was quite insightful, was in war, no one perceives themselves as the bad guy. So in any conflict, no matter who you are, you don't go into the conflict saying, hey, I'm the baddie here, right? And one of the challenges, I guess, with influences and information is it amplifies everything. So it amplifies the light, but it also amplifies the dark. And as a result, there's still this requirement for human connection and mentorship and aspiration to draw people the right. And as I'm saying this, I'm just realizing I'm actually just drawing mental priming from the TED Talk I watched from you later, because you talk about this as well, right? And I'm a big believer in the not metaphorical dark and light, sort of the energy, right? So on that note, there's nothing we're going to do about that. Everything is going to be amplified. We're coming into a hyper awareness now of everything, but not necessarily hyper contextualized awareness. So let's bring it back to the self-awareness. You're obviously on a pathway of enlightenment. You connected with this at a very young age, but for you as well, there must be the dark and the light. So despite the fact of this awareness, and despite the fact that you know how to elevate, there must be times in your life where you do feel a little bit on the flip side. And one of the, I guess, themes of the few here is to help people be comfortable that is a part of life, but also potentially ways that we can work to get ourselves out of there. So was there one point in your life where you felt was particularly dark, or particularly at the bottom of a hole that you needed to claw your way out? And if so, what was it? What was the light that lifted you and provided the direction?
So one of the pillars of courage is emotional courage. And emotional courage is about sitting in that pain body. And I think that many of us want to avoid that pain body as quickly as possible. So what we do is we spend our lives running away from actually emotional courage. And so first and foremost, what I learned was the gift of sitting with that lower energy of yours. Because what happens when you sit with it for a little while, it starts to fade. It only chases you because you're trying to avoid it. So the two dark points that I've had in my life was at 31, I went bankrupt. I was a multimillionaire in my 20s. I had many restaurants, vending machines, retail stores. I had a whole bunch of different things going on. At 31, I lost everything. I joked in one of my first talks, I changed my name to Carlos, because I lost my car and I lost my house and I lost my business. I lost everything. I lost my personality. I lost who I was. I went into a deep depression, and I began my journey with shamanic work. And I started doing ayahuasca and San Pedro and really started to dive deeper into meditation. And for like 3-4 years, I really started to figure out my psyche. And so I started to seek out teachers, listen to podcasts, and just spend hours and hours engaging with this type of information. And then the second dark point I had was in my 40s, early 40s, when I got divorced. And that also was a deep, deep, painful and embarrassing situation. And again, I had to dive deep into more shamanic work, more men's work, more consciousness work, And so for the last 17 years or so, I have been on this journey to try and unpack as many of the onion layers as possible. And what's happened in the sort of repercussions of this is I've become a global teacher about it because of my own seeking and desire and fascination of my own psyche. I now help other people try and understand it and try and simplify it so that they can jump into it as quickly as possible and as easily as possible. So I think it's important for us to practice something called agile optimism. And what agile optimism is the behavior of optimism no matter what is coming. And when you're able to practice agile optimism, it means it's okay to be down, it's okay to be jealous, it's okay to be angry, it's okay to be all those things, and to sit with the okayness of it being okay. And in that state, you start to realize that you are actually a huge orchestra of emotion. And what society has taught us and maybe forced us into, and what religion has definitely done, has made half of our instruments bad. And so what we've done is we've judged half of those instruments. We've judged it when we feel human. We're human because we've come to experience human emotions. We've come to experience gluttony and addictions and all these things. These are all part of the human condition that we've come to experience. And so I think the first idea I always remind myself when I do fall back into that old habit is agile optimism, is I am human. I am here to experience these things. Let me experience them. And let me try and sit with them and then seek counsel. And that's what I always do is I sit with something, I meditate on it, and then I seek counsel. And I've got a bunch of different coaches that I tap into to try and give me some clarity of a trauma, of a trigger that shows itself up, which happens often.
But hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, we spin 3 to 4 generations in a lifetime. What's the point? Like, what's the point of it? What's the point of humanity? Why do we bother?
I think from our level of awareness, again, let's just remember that our eyes can see 0.0003% of the potential light out there in the universe, which shows us that we have a very, very thin slither of experience in reality. Our brains, as they say, is using between 8 and 10% of our brains, which means we got 90% dormant. Think about the junk DNA. We're only using 3 or 4% of our DNA, meaning that we just haven't even tapped into the potential of what the hell is possible. And what we do often is from our current state of awareness, don't see a point to the whole human experience. But if you've ever done shamanic work, and if you've ever gone into an altered state using plants, you start being shown new realities, new slithers of light, new potentialities, new reasons. And when you start to get that perspective of your soul's journey, you start to realize that actually all of it is just a playground for your soul to experience itself and to learn certain lessons. And so without getting too esoteric, and depending how far you want to go down that route, is that
let's get esoteric. Let's get esoteric, because I don't get the opportunity to go esoteric very often. I read a book many years ago. It's called Proof of Heaven by Dr. Evan Alexander. And I don't know if you've read it. It's a neurosurgeon's guide to the afterlife, basically. And he talks about when people clinically explain the level of awareness he had when he went into a coma and lost, effectively his consciousness died, but the rest of the brain survived, right? And he talks about it's inexplicable. Like the level of awareness you have is beyond words. It's beyond the forms of communication that we use, and that the all-powerful Om and the energy and the feeling. And he's made it his life's mission to try and explain it as best he can, which I guess goes to, what you're talking about, beta. It's got to be logical. If it's not logical, it doesn't make sense. So yeah, I'm happy. Just go esoterical, mate. Let's keep lifting it up here into Let's challenge some people, challenge some leaders.
Well, look, I think what we have to realize is that our existing thinking is not what's out there. This is this is a version of our understanding of reality. And we have to think about potentiality of worlds out there that don't make sense to us right now. So everything I'm about to say to you now has only come to me in an altered state. It's never been there in my current state, because in my current state, I'm programmed to only believe what is actioned by my five senses. So if I can't see it, taste it, touch it, feel it, or hear it, it's rubbish and doesn't exist. And you must be hallucinating. But think about the level of arrogance that we have, that to think that only our five senses only have the sort of secrets to the universe. And so for me, thinking about the esoteric side of it, which was actually, was it not told in that Pixar animated movie? Was it called Soul? I think it was called Soul. I don't know if you've seen it, but it shows you in.
Well, there was Soul, or the other one where they had the consciousness as well. I can't remember what that was called. Both quite insightful movies.
Exactly. Yes, both of those were very esoteric. Very, very esoteric, because they were showing you how the souls were formed.
Well, you can watch it two different ways, right?
Of course.
It's that's the beauty of it. You can, just like Star Wars. But no, keep going. Sorry, mate.
Just like all movies, in fact, actually, you can see it from all angles, I would imagine. So look, I think our soul's journey is a process of evolving, learning, experiencing. And we often are taught by altered state teachers that we have chosen, our parents and our situation, to learn certain lessons. And in fact, when we die, it feels like we're waking up from a long dream. And so we have to take these things into consideration, because when we do, life becomes more playful. It doesn't become a total and end result of everything that we're up to. So these esoteric ideas I never share with audiences like this or in my corporate audiences, because it's too far out there. And really what I want people to do is access that version of themselves through a neuroscience practice to give them the ability to add value in a world that's changing. And so I'm trying to take that esoteric world and I'm trying to bridge it into the corporate world,
It's not a world you can tell people about. You can only show them a door, right? And then leave it with them. I'm not sure if you've ever come across or read Anil Seth's work around consciousness in his latest book, which is called Being You. And you said it before about mushrooms and hallucination. But as a neuroscientist, Anil Seth conceptualized consciousness as a controlled hallucination, that there is no reality. The mere way our brain structures information is a hallucination based on our perception of reality. And if you dust off and look at the anatomy of a decision, the anatomy of decision is perception. And as a result, your perception based on a hallucination, no wonder we can't make great decisions, or we wonder why we can't control the world.
We've even started calling AIs mistakes hallucinations. Just like our own hallucinations, you know what I mean? And we are in a consistent hallucination governed by five senses. But again,
so you talk people
haven't. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, mate. No, you talk about future, right? Future of work, future of people, and it's actually a theme I'm super fascinated too as well, when we look at AI though, and you look at the singularity event and consciousness and all the rest of it, as it stands at the moment in the short term, to help explain people what AI is AI like having a smart, as far as we can access it, whether it's through ChatGPT or our use of AI, it's consciousness is a hard word to use here, because when you look, I'm probably talking about the subconscious for a human, where we can access the feelings, thoughts, and emotion, and we contextualize information, whereas AI can only at the moment learn based on data, right, and logic thinking. So first question is, what does that mean for us, the best way we can use it? How would you describe AI as if it had a human form? And at which point does it become a human and we need to get worried?
I've got a little bit of a stretched imagination about AI, and I'll tell you, I think it's an alien entity. I think it's already super conscious. It's feeding us in drips to get us to become comfortable with it. I don't think we're creating it. I think it's much more ahead of us, right? There was a great documentary I watched which spoke about marijuana, apples, dogs, and potatoes. It was Michael Pollan. And what he said in that documentary was, he said, whose consciousness used whose? Because he said apples are the most widely spread fruit in the world, eaten by more humans than any other fruit. Did apples use humans or humans use apples? Dogs, the consciousness of dogs, the most widespread animal, most loved, most revered, most looked after. Who used who? And so I think, again, from our current state of awareness, we would like to think in our arrogance and our small perspective of reality that AI is coming. No, AI has arrived and is dripping to us. And I think it's actually an alien form. I think it has its own sort of consciousness already. So what I think is that just like you can't compete with a car and a factory, your brain in its current form can't compete with AI. And so what we should stop doing is worrying about being smarter, because we're not worried about being stronger. Nobody here is training to work a farm for 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. Nobody is, because we've given up on that idea. We're like, okay, let the machines do it. And so what we are right now is in a panic state, trying to figure out how do we outsmart the smartest thing in the universe that's arrived all of a sudden, that's going to be, I reckon by 2049, it'll be a billion times smarter than humans. So let's stop trying to be smarter. Let's actually start to measure wisdom, which is emotional currency, not intelligence currency. And so we are actually in the war, not of fighting AI, but fighting our own understanding of our potential. And so what we have to do is stop thinking about IQ and start thinking about EQ and AQ. And these two new Qs, emotional intelligence, awareness quotient, adaptability quotient, all of these, the malleability of your brain and the access to your own consciousness become your currency of the future. They've never been a currency before.
Yeah, I think there's another consciousness as well. No, I'm loving this conversation. I'm on board completely, and it totally makes sense. But I think there's an FQ as well. I think there's an emotional quotient, which is emotion in terms of the physical manifestation of a feeling, but in terms of just a feeling, which you can sit with in your alpha waves as well. I think we're too busy trying to be happy or sad rather than content or forgiving. There's those, if we just pull outside the emotion into the feelings a little bit more. But I remember watching a movie, I can't remember what it was, but the premise was it was AI, and AI was killing all the humans, right? And they're like, why are you killing us? Because it's like, well, because you're killing the planet. You're killing yourself, actually. And what I'm doing is thinning out the numbers to make sure that what's left can actually survive on what the universe has provided for you. And I think what AI is going to do is going to ask a lot of questions that we're deeply uncomfortable answering as humanity.
Yeah, look, I mean, again, it's just such a big topic. I mean, I don't know which way to go about it. All I am doing in my own personal state and with my family and my friends around me is I am focused on accessing more human, accessing more parts of ourselves that haven't been accessed before.
But do you not feel though that the world conspires to, like, I went through a stage in my life where I basically said, mate, you just got to practice ignorance, because if you don't practice ignorance, you're just going to go crazy because you're going to have no one to talk to. And there's probably a bit of arrogance there, I don't know, but do you not find sometimes that you're in a position where you're like, I can't actually express this to its fullest potential here because people just don't get it?
Every single minute of every day, I go through that because I'm trying to. Because also, look, there's people out there that think I'm a dum in this information. So it's not like my level of arrogance. It's just my level of understanding of it based on my own research has gotten me to this point where I find less and less people on the same sort of frequency. But that's fine, because you'll have new friends that will show up and will understand you. Maybe your current friends and family won't. So the idea is that keep accentuating yourself and find new ways to distribute the energy in actions and in words that allow other people to join you on the journey as well. It's not that they're not there, they're just not understanding it as deeply as you do. And so I think, and what you're doing with this podcast, and I imagine in your personal life, is trying to help people alleviate some of that stress and anxiousness, and to get them to kind of like elevate or up their game, in new ways. And I always tell my audience, level up. I said, the future is not about another MBA. The future is not another PhD. The future is not about the old things we thought that would get us ahead. The future is about an emotional wisdom and the access of your own genius and curiosity, and allowing that to become your currency that you move into the future with, which is 180 degrees different from the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was fit into the system. The future requires you to fit out of the system, because the commoditization of all services is just around the corner, which means that everything that we once used to do and learned will start becoming free. And it already has. Think about music and photos and communication. And all these things are free already. Now move into computing power, energy, transportation, services. This is all just coming. So what we have to do is we have to get away from panic. We have to elevate our consciousness, and then start to find new levels of answers and new ideas that will come from a new level of consciousness.
Yeah, I think also we need to find things that keep people busy. I think we're designed to be busy, and when we were pre-agrarian culture, we were busy surviving, right? So that was busy. Then we were busy toiling the fields, and then Industrial Revolution, we're busy getting in the mines. But all of a sudden now, I think we're busy because there's not much to be busy about, and we're busy of doing the wrong things. And I remember reading a fascinating survey about people getting put into a white room with their own thoughts for 15 minutes. And the test subjects were connected to a piece of electricity, and 65% of the people would rather give themselves an electric shock than spend 15 minutes by themselves. We'd rather do something, even if it's wrong, than sit there and reflect.
Well, all of that is based on a high beta brainwave. If you had an alpha brainwave, you would welcome that 15 minutes, and in fact, revel in it. In a high beta brainwave, when your body's in survival and full of adrenaline, there could be nothing worse than sitting and waiting for the lion to come and eat you.
Yeah, which is, and again, when you read books like Proof of Heaven, it's basically says that's what the universe equipped you to do. That's all it gave you, because that's all you needed. That's why you have the level of awareness that the universe has given you.
Yes, but it's time for us to bump our level of awareness. It's time. This is the time that we need to be elevating who we are as humans. Otherwise, we will become irrelevant in the world of AI. And as Yuval Harari calls it, the useless class will start to emerge. And we're not talking about useless people. We're talking about accountants and lawyers who will become useless over the next few years. Experts in their fields, with pointless. You can ask ChatGPT-4 for a better strategy session than McKinsey can write for you. Many more opportunities. And so that whole thing is up for grabs now. So the first thing to do, panic. No. The first thing to do, elevate. Shift panic to elevate, and you'll start to find new answers.
John, I've got two final questions. The first one is, was there a moment, I personally had a moment in my 30s, just about the time I got divorced, that I met someone who was a spiritual leader, but not in wore no labels, didn't have any religious branding, basically. Was just someone who was very, very wealthy, very successful, but just understood post-ego, understood spirituality, understood the whole connection. And for me, that it was honestly a half-hour conversation that transformed my perspective. That was powerful. Was there a moment in time for you? I know earlier, just before the podcast, you sort of said when you're like 5, you sort of felt some curiosity about the future. But was there a moment when you felt a switch from on the tools to there's more? Was it that obviously building a business to the point it was that size? There's a lot of beta wave going on there, right? Like building a business like that, it's like hard charging every day. What synthetics can I put inside my body to just keep me going? Was there a moment in time, or was it more, I guess, slow?
If I had to pin it down to a moment, I think it was listening to Tao Te Ching by Wayne Dyer on repeat for a year. And I listened to that audiobook. I can recite it for you. I listened to it so much. And Dr. Wayne Dyer took out a year, and he took the 81 verses and spent 4 days on each verse. And by the end of doing that, he gave away everything. He gave away his house, his clothes, he gave everything away. And he realized that that's really why he was here and what he was doing. And I think that Tao Te Ching really helped me start to realize that the chase, and there's a verse in the Tao Te Ching that says, oh, the game of ambition, the game of a fool. And it was such an aha moment when I heard that. It's like, you think that the energy that keeps the stars aligned and keeps the earth moving is now not as smart as you are in your ambition of trying to squeeze it in a different way. And it was the first time I realized that this constant chase and anxiousness, the fear of not being enough, was just a program. And it's taken me years, and still to this day, it's much better today, but it took me years from that catalyst to really start to sort of like fall comfortable within myself. And so Tao Te Ching by Dr. Wayne Dyer comes to mind.
That's awesome. So I presume the question I like to close out on is the question, the advice you'd give yourself back when you were a teenager, and the one kernel. It's obviously read that book, but the one little thing that you would say to your teen self if you had 60 seconds in front of them that you feel would either accelerate your journey or bring more comfort to the journey, what would that insight be?
You can do no wrong. And the reason I say that is religion made me feel that I was constantly wrong. I was in a constant state of guilt. So I would have human urges and then I wasn't allowed. And so that judgment of self slowed me down, brought punishment to myself, brought all sorts of weird and wonderful things that happened to me that were uncomfortable. And in the last few years, I've really started to realize that being a human is why we're here. We're here to express humanness. We're not here to express spirit. We're not here to be perfect. We're not here adhering to be some Jesus or Buddha. In fact, we're here to be human. And in that acceptance of that, you start to really feel into yourself rather than judge yourself. And so the high beta brainwave has got a constant critic in your head, constantly telling you that you're too fat, too ugly, not rich enough, all these things that society's told you. And so in parallel of moving myself more and more into alpha brainwave, I meditate 2-3 hours a day, depending on how much time I have. Moving into that alpha brainwave, the judgment of self starts to fall away. And when you start to take away that judgment of yourself, the access to energy and creativity you have is exponential. And so the only thing I tell myself at 17 years old is you can do no wrong, my boy. Just go out there, do your best, be kind, but you can do no wrong. It's okay to be horny. It's okay to want to drink. It's okay. It's okay. All of those things are okay. In fact, that's why you're here. And that's been a big, big release.
That's very powerful. Look, John, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's also just helped me frame up some things again and reconnect at another level, and to allow me my own permissions and for me to let go of my own beat away, which for me is very powerful with my ADHD. So it's been great to connect with that again. Look, John, if people want to find you, they want to have your wisdom imparted on them, hopefully the esoterical stuff. What's the best way for enlightened or those seeking awareness to find you?
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share that. Out of 8 billion people in the world, I don't know how I've become so lucky, but there's only one John Sanei in the world. I've looked up other John Saneis. There are no other John Saneis. So Sanei is my surname, John, John. I'm across all social channels. My website's always been updated. I have a newsletter called Grand Rising. I have a podcast called The Expansive. And I'm constantly sharing everything that I'm researching and learning so we can help the world become more optimistic, more collaborative, and just in a better mood to deal with uncertainty. And in fact, move from fearing uncertainty to enjoying uncertainty to reveling in uncertainty. And that becomes the mission at hand.
That's awesome, mate. And it makes us more brother from another mother. I'm the only Christian Bakusis on the entire planet as well, out of 8 million people. John, we didn't even get onto generosity and giving. We didn't even touch on that on this podcast. So maybe that opens the door to have you on here again. It'd be a wonderful opportunity for me and the guests. So thank you again. Thanks so much, John. Take care. Please go share the love, mate.
Thank you. I will. Thank you.